Imagine a millionaire woman, pregnant, publicly humiliated by a scandal that left her completely alone in the most ruthless corporate world in the United States. Now imagine that same woman crossing paths with a man who lives in his car, a homeless stranger, yet with a dignity most people have never witnessed. What brought these two distant worlds together? How can a gesture as simple as offering tea transform someone's life? This is not a fairy tale. It's a story about silence, presence, and what remains when everything else falls apart. If you're drawn to stories that challenge conventions and reveal what it truly means to love, subscribe to the channel and follow this narrative to the end. You'll be stunned by the truth behind her choice. Emily Hartwell parked her grey Tesla in front of a modest wooden house she'd rented on Airbnb in Carmel by the Sea. The engine went quiet, but inside her, everything was still screaming. Headlines, judgment, the voice of her partner yelling in her company's lobby, and the blur of an Uber speeding off into the night. It was all too recent, all still raw. She was 5 months pregnant and for the first time in her 39 years had no idea what came next. Her OB-GYN had warned the stress could hurt the baby. So she fled south, telling no one, not her sister, not her friends, not even her assistant, just her and the growing life inside her. The house was humble, sun-faded wooden planks, 2 rocking chairs on the porch, and an open view of the Pacific. As she rolled her suitcase across the wooden floorboards, her eyes caught something next door, a battered SUV. It hadn't moved in days. A blanket crumpled in the back seat, a backpack, a dented thermos, signs of someone else who didn't quite belong. That night she couldn't sleep. The baby moved. So did her thoughts. She dreamed of press conferences, of her father's silence when the scandal broke, CEO Hartwell pregnant by married employee. But nobody knew what came before. The silent dinners in a luxury apartment. The loneliness of being a powerful woman in a world ruled by men who never grew up. The next morning she stepped outside for air. The wind brought the scent of salt and pine. She sat on the porch with a mug of chamomile tea. That's when she heard the sound of a car door creaking open. A man stepped out of the SUV. Dishevelled brown hair, stubble, a faded Patagonia t-shirt, and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in weeks. He glanced at her, hesitated, then nodded. "Morning," he said, voice rough. Emily returned the nod but said nothing. She wasn't in the habit of speaking to strangers. Not anymore. He opened the trunk, pulled out a toothbrush and water bottle, brushed his teeth outside, facing the ocean, washed his face, then stood still, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. Emily watched him, curious, slightly uneasy, and for a reason she wouldn't be able to name for weeks. She didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning. Emily spent most of that first morning indoors. The house, though small and warm, echoed with a kind of silence that only those recently abandoned truly hear. She rearranged the mugs in the cabinet, lined up the tea boxes by flavour, folded and refolded the same baby blanket she had tucked into her suitcase before fleeing San Francisco. Anything to avoid the weight of her phone on the counter, its black screen pulsing like a threat. Dozens of messages waited, news alerts, missed calls from her father, from her lawyer. Her assistant had sent 3 emails titled urgent. She ignored them all. It was around 10 when she heard a knock. Not loud, not demanding, just human. She opened the door a crack. The man from the SUV stood there, holding a white paper cup with both hands. "Chamomile," he said. "Thought it might help. You look tired." Emily hesitated. Her world before had taught her that nothing came without reason. Every gesture had motive, but something about his tone, or maybe the way he didn't meet her eyes, made her take the cup. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and stepped back without another word. She closed the door slowly, held the cup to her nose. The scent was earthy, real. She hadn't had anything real in weeks. That afternoon, she saw him again through the curtain. He was returning from the small general store down the road, 2 canvas bags in hand. One went into the back of the SUV. The other, oddly, he placed on her doorstep. Inside, apples, a box of crackers, a jar of peanut butter, and a folded napkin with handwritten words. "Didn't know what you liked. Hope this is okay." She stood with the bag in her arms, unsure what protocol existed for this kind of kindness. Her old life had scripts, public relations strategies, investor briefings. But this man had left groceries on her porch like it was the most natural thing in the world. She made herself a plate that evening, ate slowly, remembered the taste of peanut butter. At night, she found herself glancing toward the SUV, the glow of a reading light inside, no radio, no movement, just presence. Before bed, she turned off the porch light. Then 5 minutes later, she turned it back on. She didn't know why. Maybe she just wanted him to see that someone noticed. The next few days unfolded with a quiet rhythm neither had planned. Mornings came with the soft creak of the SUV door, the scent of coffee drifting faintly across the driveway, and the sound of gulls circling above the misty coast. Emily remained cautious, but her curiosity was changing. It wasn't about who he was anymore. It was about how he made the silence feel less like absence and more like presence. She noticed herself timing her steps with his return. If she heard the rumble of the SUV engine, she would step onto the porch, tea in hand, pretending to check the weather. He would nod. Sometimes lift a grocery bag as greeting. Once he left a small container of strawberries at her doorstep. No note this time, but she knew it was him. They never spoke much, just a few words here and there. She started leaving the second rocking chair slightly angled toward his car, an invitation not verbalized, but present. One morning, after she returned from a walk, she found the chair had been moved half an inch closer to the edge of the porch. It was raining again when the power flickered out completely. She stood in her kitchen, flashlight balanced in one hand, considering the stack of emergency candles. Then came the knock, gentle, measured. He stood there, holding a small lantern and a thermos. Power's out. Made tea before it cut, mint and chamomile. She opened the door wider. You want to sit? Just the porch. They sat for nearly an hour, the lantern casting flickering shadows across their faces. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. He stayed quiet, sipping from a chipped mug. The air smelled of rain and earth, thick with stillness. Feels like we're in a ghost story, she said. He smiled. Ghosts don't bring tea. And that was it. No dramatic confessions, just quiet. Shared space. Gentle pauses. Later that night, as she lay in bed, the storm outside softening to a drizzle, she realized her breathing had been steady the entire evening. No panic, no dread. She hadn't thought of headlines or broken trusts, just of rain and tea. And him. For the first time in weeks, she turned off the lamp without hesitation. And in the dark, she smiled. The next morning brought a different kind of stillness. The storm had passed, but left behind a softened air, as if the world had exhaled overnight. Emily stepped onto the porch with a cup of tea, her other hand resting lightly on her belly. The SUV door was already open. He sat on the bumper, tying his shoes, glancing at the horizon. She lifted her mug in a small salute. He nodded back, eyes warm despite the tiredness. In the days that followed, their silent routine deepened. She began leaving out a second cup, always filled, always unspoken. One morning it was gone when she returned from brushing her teeth. Nothing said, but everything noticed. They passed each other often, him returning with bags of groceries, her carrying books or folding baby clothes on the porch. The tension had faded. What replaced it wasn't romance, at least not in the conventional sense. It was steadiness, familiarity, presence. One afternoon, she dropped a spoon on the steps and bent awkwardly to retrieve it. Her balance shifted. She would have fallen if not for the sudden, firm grip on her forearm. He had crossed the yard instinctively, eyes wide with concern. You okay? She nodded, breathless. Yeah, just a little clumsy. He didn't release her right away. Their eyes met, not romantically, not yet, but with a quiet depth that spoke of mutual recognition. Then he let go. That evening, she stepped outside, restless. The baby had kicked all day. He was leaning against the SUV, a book in hand. She walked to him. She's been active. She? Emily smiled. Doctor says it's a girl. He set the book down. May I? Without a word, she guided his hand to her belly. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then a shift, a flutter, a kick. His breath caught. She's strong. She is. They stood in silence, his hands still resting on her. The contact wasn't charged, it wasn't performative, it was grounding. As the sky dimmed, she whispered, "Thank you." For what? For not making this weird? He chuckled. You're the least weird thing I've known in a long time. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily stared at the ceiling. The image of his hand on her belly wouldn't leave her. It wasn't about love. Not yet. It was about trust. About being seen and not looked through. For the first time since she arrived, she fell asleep without waking. The rain returned 2 days later, steady and persistent, soaking the coastline with a hush that seemed to ask everyone to slow down. Emily had planned to assemble the portable crib that morning. It was still in its box, delivered days ago, untouched. She laid out the pieces in the middle of the living room, instructions in hand, and tried. Once, twice. By the third failed attempt, the screws no longer fit, and the diagram made less sense than ever. Frustrated, she dropped the Allen wrench and sat cross-legged among the panels, her back to the couch, her eyes full but refusing to cry. That's when she heard the knock. He stood there, holding a grocery bag and a rain-slicked jacket, his hair damp, the corners of his jeans soaked to the knees. "Saw your light on," he said. "Brought soup and ginger tea." She gestured to the crib in defeat. "You know anything about these things?" He stepped in, took one glance at the mess, and smiled gently. "Let's figure it out." They worked together in silence, hands brushing, tools passing back and forth. In less than 20 minutes, the frame stood upright. Sturdy, simple, and somehow symbolic. "You've done this before," she said. He nodded. "Once. For my son." She looked up, surprised. He didn't often speak of himself. "He's in Oregon now, with his mom." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It's okay," he replied. "Some things fall apart. Some stay with you anyway." Emily nodded, not out of politeness, but understanding. There were things in her life that hadn't left her either. Shame, resilience, hope. They sat on the floor beside the crib, each with a cup of tea. Outside, the storm had calmed to a drizzle. She leaned back against the wall. "I didn't think I'd ever get to this point, preparing for something that still scares me." He sipped his tea, watching her. "Maybe that's how you know it's real." She looked at him then. Really looked. There was wariness in his eyes, but also something else. Steadiness, grace. "Do you regret helping?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I've never once regretted staying." And in that moment, as thunder rolled gently in the distance, Emily felt the smallest shift, not in the weather, but within herself. The crib was ready, the future uncertain. But the present, this quiet space, this quiet man, felt, for the first time in a long while, like home. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm between them became a quiet thread running through Emily's days. She noticed the absence of tension in the moments they shared. No performative kindness, no expectation, just a presence that calmed something inside her. She began to look forward to the sound of his SUV door, the soft knock, the grocery bag left beside hers. The way he never looked too long, never asked too much. One morning, after a rough night of contractions that weren't quite contractions, she sat on the porch with her hands cradling her belly and tears threatening again. He appeared without a word, placed a steaming mug beside her, and sat on the step facing the ocean. "Rough night?" he asked. She nodded. "You don't have to talk, but you don't have to sit alone either." It was the simplest thing. But it broke her. She cried, quietly, without drama. The tears that finally came weren't about her career or the tabloids, or even the father who disappeared. They were about being seen, without needing to explain. When she finally spoke, it wasn't with shame. "I used to think I had everything under control. Schedules, people, outcomes. Then I realized I didn't even know who I was when things fell apart." He didn't give her advice, just listened. That, more than anything, was what began to reassemble her. Not answers, but space. That evening, as they shared a quiet dinner of peanut butter toast and sliced pears, she reached out and touched his wrist lightly. "Thank you for not needing me to be okay." He looked at her, expression steady. "We all fall apart, Emily. It's what we do afterward that matters." The lights flickered once, but stayed. Outside, the fog wrapped around the pine trees like a blanket, muting the world. Before heading to bed, she handed him a folded blanket. Not for the couch, but for himself. A quiet offering. He didn't ask questions, just accepted it. In the stillness of the night, as she lay awake in bed, she realized something had shifted deep inside her. Not just because of the baby, or the house, or the silence, but because of him. He hadn't tried to rescue her. He simply remained. And sometimes that's what healing looks like. The storm that night came without warning. A cold front pushed down from the north, whipping the sea into white froth and battering the windows with heavy gusts. Emily lit candles along the window ledge, the power already flickering. She'd just settled onto the couch with a blanket when there was a knock. 3 soft taps. She opened the door to find him soaked, wind-blown, eyes squinting against the spray. "Didn't mean to bother you. Just... the wind tore my tarp off, didn't want to drive in it." She stepped aside. "Come in." He hesitated only a moment, then crossed the threshold for the first time. Emily handed him a towel. He dried his face, then stood by the door, unsure. She gestured to the small kitchen table. "Sit. I made tea." They sat across from each other, 2 mismatched mugs between them, candlelight flickering shadows onto the walls. He looked around like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to relax. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just not used to being indoors with someone." She smiled. "I'm not used to sharing space either." After the tea, they sat in the living room. Rain pounded the roof, but thunder rolled far off. He sat on the floor by the fireplace. She stayed on the couch, her feet tucked under her. He noticed the baby books stacked on the coffee table. "You ready?" "No," she said, "but I don't think anyone is." He nodded slowly. "She'll be lucky. You're steady." "I'm scared all the time. That just means you care." They didn't talk about the past, not about his son, not about her ex. Just now, he leaned his back against the wall, staring into the flickering shadows that danced across the ceiling. "This is the first quiet night I've had in a long time," he said. Emily didn't respond. She just let the silence fill the space between them like a warm blanket. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. He picked up a small baby sock that had fallen from the armrest, held it gently. "She's already changing your world." Emily watched him. "Maybe she's changing both of ours." Near midnight, she offered a blanket. "You can stay. Couch is fine." He didn't move. "Are you sure?" "I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." He nodded, took the blanket, lay on the couch like someone who hadn't known comfort in years. He turned to face the window, but not before offering her one more glance. Not of gratitude, but of something quieter. Trust. She watched from the hallway, listened to his breathing even out. Then finally she let herself sleep, deeply, fully, without fear. For the first time in a long, long while. The next morning was quiet, almost sacred. Emily woke to the smell of coffee and the low hum of someone moving in the kitchen. For a brief second, she forgot everything, the scandal, the isolation, the child growing inside her. All she knew was that someone else was there. He was already dressed, hair damp from a quick shower under the outdoor hose, frying eggs with practiced calm. She stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching. There was something about the way he moved, like he belonged, like he'd done this 100 times. "I hope you don't mind," he said without turning. "You were asleep. I figured I'd make breakfast." "I don't mind," she said, her voice still soft with sleep. They ate in comfortable silence. Eggs, toast and orange slices. No ceremony, just presence. The kind of breakfast that didn't need words. Later she asked if he wanted to come with her to the clinic. She didn't know why she asked. Maybe she didn't want to go alone. Maybe she wanted someone to see what was coming with her. He didn't hesitate. Sure. The clinic was bright and impersonal. The receptionist blinked twice when she saw Emily, then glanced at him. No questions were asked, but the silence was loud. The nurse called her name, and when she stood, he stood too. The nurse paused. "Are you the father?" He looked at Emily. She looked at the nurse. "Yes," she said simply. No one questioned it further. After the appointment, they drove home in silence. The air between them had changed, not in tension, but in quiet gravity, like something unspoken had been named. Back at the house, she offered him tea. He made a shelf in her hallway that had been wobbling for days. She sat nearby, folding tiny baby clothes into drawers that still smelled of fresh pine. "Do you miss your old life?" she asked suddenly. He paused, hammer in hand. "Sometimes, but not the way people think." She nodded, understanding more than she expected. That night, as they sat on the porch, she placed her hand over his. Not romantically, not with expectation, just connection. "You're here," she said. "That's enough." And it was. It truly was. It began with a photo, grainy, rushed, taken from behind a tinted car window. Emily, visibly pregnant, walking beside him outside the clinic. His hand lightly on her back, her head turned toward him mid-sentence, both unaware. By the time they returned to the house that afternoon, it had already gone viral. Headlines spread across gossip sites, financial tabloids and social media alike. From boardroom to backstreet, ex-CEO found living with vagrant. Emily Hartwell's new love. former executive or just a stray? The words cut deep, not because they were true, but because of how confidently they were wrong. Reporters began circling the coastal town. Paparazzi parked across from the house. A drone hovered above the trees. Emily shut the curtains. She disconnected the router. Her phone, silent for weeks, buzzed non-stop. Her father left 3 voicemails. Her lawyer sent a statement template. Her former assistant emailed a concerned inquiry. He stood near the back door, quiet. "I can leave," he said, "if this makes it worse." "No," she answered immediately, too fast, her voice catching. "You're not the problem." For the first time, she reached for his hand without hesitation. He took it like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, they didn't sleep much. The flashes of cameras outside pulsed through the blinds like lightning. He stayed on the couch again. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of the storm outside and the storm online. In the morning, she opened her laptop, logged in, typed a message and posted it without asking anyone's permission. "You think you know the story? You don't. He stayed. That's all you need to know." Within hours, the narrative began to shift. Some mocked her, many defended her. But the tone changed. A photo of them laughing together under an umbrella appeared, followed by messages of support from other women. Women who had also fallen, who had also rebuilt. In the quiet that followed, she looked at him and whispered, "They don't scare me anymore." He nodded. "They don't get to define us." And in that moment, the judgment of the world outside felt far away, washed out by the sound of the waves and the warmth of someone who never walked away. The next day was gentle. No headlines, no messages, no helicopters above the trees. Just the sound of wind combing through the coastal pines and rain, soft as breath, tapping at the windows. Emily stayed in bed longer than usual. When she finally rose, he was already making breakfast. Eggs again, this time with rosemary from a neighbour's garden and toast that had been lightly burnt on one side. He handed her a plate without a word. She smiled, not because of the meal, but because of him, his presence, his steadiness. The baby moved, stronger now. She took his hand and placed it gently on her belly. They stood there, silent, no music, no phones, no noise beyond the morning. It was more than enough. Later that afternoon, they walked the trail behind the house. The path led to a small overlook. From there, they could see the ocean curve away endlessly, disappearing into a misty horizon. Have you ever felt like you belonged somewhere?" she asked him. "Not until this," he said. "Not until you." They didn't kiss. They didn't make promises. They just stood, side by side, letting the silence speak for them. That night, the storm returned, soft and rhythmic. He sat beside her on the couch, her feet in his lap. She read a book aloud. Occasionally she paused, looked at him, then continued. When the baby kicked again, he laughed. It was the kind of laugh that made his shoulders drop, that made his eyes wrinkle, that felt like it came from a place long sealed. "She already has opinions," he said. "She'll have strength," Emily replied. "She'll have stories." They fell asleep on the couch, the fire a warm glow across the floor. Outside, the rain kept falling. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady, like love should be. If this story moved you, if it made you pause and feel something real, subscribe to the channel. More stories like this are waiting to be told. Quiet, deep, and true.